So welcome to our webinar, Mastering AI for Work and Life. My name is Les Jones. I'm the Marketing Director for Atiba and the author of Atiba's AI Guide for Business Leaders. If you're new to Atiba, we're an IT consulting firm. We provided IT services and custom software development since 1992. We offer AI services, including custom AI programming, Microsoft Copilot consulting, and AI readiness assessments. And I want to talk about readiness assessments for just a minute. An AI readiness assessment helps your organization discover how emerging AI technologies can help improve its outcomes. Because you're attending this webinar, we are offering you a free AI readiness pre-assessment. This is a free report that outlines AI strategies customized to your business, and we will also highlight specific AI software tools for your organization. We will email you a link to a web page where you can claim your free pre-assessment. There's a form that takes about 5 minutes to complete, and then we will evaluate your needs and follow up with your custom pre-assessment. So we have a great presentation for you today. There's a Q&A button in the Zoom window. We'll stop periodically to answer those questions. We'll get to as many questions as we can. If we don't get to your question, we will try to reach out and get an answer to you afterwards. After the webinar, we will email you a copy of the 14-page AI Guide for Business Leaders that has links to dozens of free programs that have AI tools that will be useful to you. It has use cases, industry statistics. And so now I would like to start the webinar and to introduce our first panelist. Anna Kate Ross is a technical project manager at Atiba, and Anna Kate is also one of the hosts of the Half Geek, Half Human podcast. Anna Kate?
Thanks so much, Les. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here today. I'll be managing the slides for the webinar and kind of probing our guests with some questions and keep things moving along. And then before we jump into it, guys, why don't you introduce yourselves? Jeff, you can go first.
Sure. I'm Jeff Johnson. Been in IT for 30-something years. I'm an outsourced CIO for Atiba, work with a couple companies, and also a project manager, lead some custom development work. And right now I'm doing a lot with AI.
Matt?
I'm Matt Sullivan. I just started my 7th year at Atiba, where I'm a team lead. I got into the AI field in graduate school in the late 90s, in which I worked for a project in which we did text mining on Shakespeare's plays. That project is now funded by the Mellon Foundation. Since that time, I've spent 20 years building predictive models, and I earned Microsoft's professional certification in AI in 2019.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. All right, we will jump into this. And the way this will flow is we've got kind of this divided into 3 sections. So we'll start with some foundational concepts of AI, then we'll go into some case studies, and then we'll talk risks and what's next. Oops. Jeff?
All right, what is AI? So AI is a big umbrella, right? It means artificial intelligence, unless you're with Apple, and then it means Apple intelligence. But it's really an area of computer science and merging with where it simulates human intelligence. So it's a lot of predictive analysis on next words and that sort of thing. So one couple key factors of AI systems is that they learn from experience. So we train them, we send them data, we teach them how to use the data. They already understand natural language, right? They recognize patterns. And with those patterns and from the learning, they solve problems, and you can have them make decisions. So artificial intelligence, that's kind of the difference between a rules-based system and an artificial intelligence system, is it uses rules, but it also can build rules on the fly, it can make decisions, it can solve problems, but it is still a simulation.
Okay. Now we'll talk about a few buzzwords, and Matt's going to walk us through this.
Yeah, so like Jeff said, AI is an umbrella term. So a lot of us, when we hear artificial or intelligence, or if we hear the word AI these days, we think of like something like ChatGPT, but it is a much broader term. And I'd like to walk you through some of the buzzwords on the slide right now and just kind of demonstrate how these different disciplines fit together. So ChatGPT is an LLM. It's a large language model, and large language models absolutely need big data. And in the case of ChatGPT, big data means probably about 1 trillion words that it was trained on. So those trillion words come from newspaper articles, from websites. They come from Reddit posts. They come from novels from different time periods, and they even come from scientific white papers. And to give you an idea or to think about the scale of of a trillion words, if I read for 2 hours a day, every day, for the next 90,000 years, I wouldn't even reach a trillion words. So ChatGPT ingests this tremendous amount of text. And from that point, it does what we call deep learning to recognize the relationships between the words in those texts. And deep learning is just an algorithm that's a subset of the machine learning algorithms. And what deep learning teaches ChatGPT to do is to look at all of those trillion words and find the relationships between those words. For example, ChatGPT, when it's training, is going to see the phrase "happy birthday to" so often that it knows that the next word is usually going to be you, happy birthday to you. It's going to see the phrase 2024 Super Bowl champions, and it knows that the next words are probably going to be Kansas City Chiefs. When we talk about generative AI, we talk about taking that large language model. We talk about the relationships that ChatGPT or Gemini has learned between these words. And you ask a question at a prompt, and that generative AI uses the text that you've just input and then predicts the words that should come next to give you an answer. So when we talk about simulating human understanding or human reasoning, I don't think that any of these models are conscious that they understand what they're telling you or that they're reasoning with you, but they're basically just predicting what word should come next every time they see a word until they come to a good stopping place. So while we're talking about generative AI, it's probably a good time to describe the process that we use to actually create this webinar. And Jeff did most of the initial work. Jeff created this entire slide deck through generative AI. So generative AI created the slides themselves, the text within those slides, the images in the slides, and Jeff turned it around really quickly. But after that alpha deck of the version was built, he circulated it amongst Atiba employees, and we added slides, we took away slides, we changed the text in all the slides to the point where I don't think any of the original bullet points are left. We brought in one of our UI experts to raise the visual appearance of the slide deck to meet our company standards. Some takeaways that we learned in that process. First of all, it did save us a ton of time. Like, we still had to do the work. We still had to hone the deck, but it gave us a starting place. So we didn't have to start with an empty slide deck. Instead, we had something that we could react to, and that made us capable of producing this much more quickly than normal. Second, for those of you paying attention, you may notice that there are words misspelled on the image. And one of the things that we learned was, as fast moving as this technology is, as impressive as it already is, it's not perfect. And one of the things that image generation AI struggles with right now is spelling words. And there are technical reasons for that. And if you're interested in the specific reasons why, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. But really, the takeaway here is, just be aware of the limitations of the tools that you're dealing with. It was fantastic for us at generating the text, but as far as generating the images, it does a great job of creating business people in suits and a podium and a screen with robots and vehicles and brains on it. I can't spell words. Mm-hmm. So the third big takeaway was that this worked pretty well for us, because we're covering a number of topics during the hour that we have with you today. But if we had to dive really deep into, say, a specific machine learning algorithm, there's a good chance that because these tools are trained on such a wide variety of text. Remember, everything from newspaper articles to Reddit posts. They probably wouldn't have the depth that we would need to generate a slide deck on a very specific topic. And for those of you that are in industries with specialized knowledge, so if you're a lawyer, you don't want to use Gemini to do your legal research. There are purpose-built tools for that. If you're a doctor, then obviously you're not using Google Photos to diagnose an X-ray for broken bones. There are specific tools for specific industries. And even though ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini have been a gateway for lots of people into these technologies, there's not a lot of understanding yet that they are general purpose tools and that there are specific tools for specific purposes.
Thanks, Matt. Let's move on to some of the key companies in the space. And in particular, let's highlight this overlap and integration between several of these. So Jeff, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so these are a lot of companies I'm sure you've heard the names of before. But these were some large companies. They have funding, and they are some of the leaders in the AI space. And we'll talk a little bit about why. Google, fairly obvious with their search engine, but they've also have Android platform. And they've developed a learning model named Gemini that they're using for generative AI, and it's pulling data, and it works very similarly to ChatGPT or Microsoft Bing Copilot. And it's a generative AI tool, and it tries in search to go ahead and answer questions, and they're integrating it more and more with Android phones, so it'll do things on your device for you. So that's Google. OpenAI might be one that some of you haven't heard of. OpenAI was really kind of a catalyst for getting us to the generative AI world. So it was started up, pulled a lot of data together. They created the initial learning modules. Microsoft was, I think it was about a 30% investor, definitely an investor into OpenAI. A lot of companies help support that. Started out as a nonprofit. They may have moved into a for-profit mode now, I think. But they go in and they're the backbone that a lot of companies use to pull data from. So they have different models, and those different models train, every year, maybe more often. But they have ChatGPT that you know of, Dolly you may know of. That's very similar to generative AI, but it's specific to images. And that's the one that we use to create a lot of the images in the slide deck. But it's also the one that has the issues with spelling. So, which I really find ironic. With all the artificial intelligence can't spell simple words. And I know there's technical reasons for that. And then Microsoft, as you know, but they have Azure AI, so that's a term you've probably heard. Microsoft Copilot is really a big umbrella for Microsoft. It's a lot of different products, so we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the deck. And then IBM, that's probably one of the first ones that I really heard of with AI and some of the tools that they use, and it's grown more and more even in its AI capabilities, right? It started in machine learning, and it started doing things for people and kind of grew more and more into the artificial intelligence. And really, IBM has been involved in this since some of the early days where they're playing chess, right? So IBM's been in there. Their Watson is something you've seen commercials on and everything else. And Amazon's got a bunch of tools. But Matt, you want to go through kind of Amazon and talk through some of the rest of those?
Sure. Amazon has specific tools like SageMaker that you can use for predictive modeling. They have a tool that actually reads through medical documents and redacts PHI. So as I was saying before, there are specific tools for specific jobs, and Amazon has lots of those. One thing that they aren't really spending a lot of time or money on, though, is generative AI. They seem to be perfectly content to let some of the other big players on this slide compete for generative AI share because most of the infrastructure that's necessary to run these generative AI models is hosted on Amazon. So they're making money by providing the technological backbone that these other services use. Tesla, we think of as a car company. They themselves believe that they're a tech company and specifically an AI company. Uh, their full self-driving mode depends on one form of AI that we call reinforcement learning, and it combines reinforcement learning with computer vision. Meta is a really interesting one. Most of the services that we have talked about and will talk about today are cloud hosted, but Meta has released an open source generative AI model called Llama that you can actually self-host. So if you don't want to take your company's data to the cloud, you can set up Llama and have generative AI without letting data leave your premises. You know, Jeff mentioned Apple Intelligence. Apple released their newest iPhones a few months ago, and they're just now rolling out the artificial intelligence capabilities for those phones and for their more recent laptops. The really interesting one to me here is NVIDIA. NVIDIA has probably worked with every company on this slide at one time or another because it's their GPUs that allow all these things to happen. All the number crunching and intensive data processing necessary to build these models happens on NVIDIA hardware.
And that's a great segue into the next couple of slides too. So Jeff, I'll let you jump in on
Yeah.
that.
So the chart really speaks to it. So from 2021 all the way up to 2030, you can see the exponential growth that's coming in a hockey stick. And really what this means is AI is going to be part of everyone's lives at work at some level, right? We can try to stay away from it, but it's going to be embedded in so many products and tools that we use that even if you don't know you're using it, you'll probably be using it for something. And it's growing. So with that, they believe about 40% employee productivity will increase in 2035. Kind of like everything, I think that's a good number for people to figure out. Does that mean we'll be able to cut the workforces by 40% and get the same amount of work done? No, probably not. But we might be able to do some higher level activities and move overall end goals faster. ChatGPT gained 1 million users in the first 5 days and 100 million in the first 2 months. So you can just see kind of the activity and the growth and the interest that's in this space, especially with the generative AI right now. And then one of the other things is, you know, from businesses and CIO Magazine and CTO, they're really predicting, you know, 3 out of 4 business leaders already have generative AI as one of the most significant technologies in their business. And they have plans within the next, 1 to 2 years to start implementing projects or start on projects. And I don't know that we get 3 to 4 of our customers right now that are interested in this, but I've talked to just about every customer I've talked to is at least interested in understanding, learning more, figuring out how do I not get left behind with this, but I also need to be safe and I need to be secure. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of those things later on in the presentation as well.
Jeff, you just brought up that the question that we hear often, even in the mainstream media, which is AI going to take my job?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the question on that from our experience so far is maybe, but maybe not. And one example that I can give you is that before I was at Atiba, I worked for a pretty good sized nonprofit. So we had a 9-figure annual budget. And some of you are probably aware, but nonprofits cover their operating expenses through revenue, but typically capital expenses come from fundraising. So I was a director at this nonprofit, and my job was to find the donors that could give at the $1,000 and $10,000 and even the $1 million or $10 million levels. And we did that by creating machine learning models that took the 100,000 plus donors in our database, and we found the ones that most look like the ones that had already given those big gifts. And we went to our board and said, we think that we have a lot more potential in our database, but we don't have enough fundraisers to actually go see everybody. So we tripled the size of our fundraising staff and saw a 500% increase in the amount of money we raised over a 12-year period. So in that case, we created some pretty good high-paying jobs through AI predictions, and at the expense of the size of my department. So I was a director, but by the time I left, I had automated away most of the tasks for people like me to do. So I was a director with 0 people reporting to me. So it was a net gain, both in terms of the amount that we were able to raise and the jobs that we created, but the jobs were created in different departments.
Mhm. It's a great point.
Yeah, it really is. That also brings to mind one of my favorite quotes, just as we've been doing this research, that, AI may not replace your job, but a person who understands AI certainly could. So it's something to keep in mind for sure. So let's talk about why now, and what factors in the environment have come together to cause this explosion in all things AI.
Yeah, this one's pretty neat with NVIDIA and their stock. So it's been about a 1,200% increase in their stock. And Matt, if you want to kind of talk about the why NVIDIA hardware is so different and why it really sparked this revolution.
I don't even know it's that their hardware is different, Jeff. It's a decision that their CEO and their leadership made about 20 years ago, which was just to open up their hardware with an API that would let programmers, like we have at our company, run code on the GPUs rather than CPUs, which is normally where we run code. And it turns out the GPUs are fantastic for doing tasks in parallel, like are needed to build AI models. So the perfect storm is really a decision NVIDIA made about 20 years ago. AWS introducing cloud computing to the public again about 20 years ago. So the tech part is one area of that perfect storm. There's a couple others. We talked about the need for big data, but up until maybe 10 years ago or so, we didn't have really big sets of data for images. So you can have Google Photos find pictures of water in the pictures that you've taken, but that's because of a Stanford professor that spent 2 years and all of her budget putting together just a big image set to train machine learning models on. So she made that possible. And just the last leg of that are the academics that create these algorithms. In 2017, there was a huge breakthrough in deep learning that can make use of the computing hardware that's available now. So if any one of those areas lags behind the others, it becomes a bottleneck. But right now we're enjoying the work that people did 10 and 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's more than just Call of Duty now, right?
Right.
But it's interesting how that gaming industry kind of got people excited about it, and they started pushing the limits with what they can do with games and video, and then people figured out the business correlation there.
I shared this with the group when we were rehearsing this also, but I read a great New Yorker article about Jensen Huang, the CEO and founder of NVIDIA, and it talks a little bit about that evolution with the video games and just his personal profile, and also the evolution of the company. It's definitely worth a read. Okay, let's move into our last slide in this section is just touching on how AI is feasting on power, and then we'll pause and do some questions.
All right. Well, this one too, the top chart, it tells the story again of the hockey stick, where it basically uses a lot of power today, and it's going to use a lot more in the future. That's the short version of the slide. It's growing about 24% per year, but even that could become exponential in its growth. And currently using about 460 terawatts of power, but it's expected to double every couple of years now. And then the bottom slide, I thought was kind of interesting because it's really about the type of work that you do with AI and how much power it takes. So chatbots really don't take a lot of power. So they're on the lower end. Text generative AI, like the ChatGPT, and writing a paper or writing some comments or giving you some writing coaching, that's kind of right in the middle of how much power it takes to run. And it does take a lot. And then when you go all the way to the right, that's your image presentation. So when you want to generate an image and you tell it, create a cat with stripes on the edge of a cliff with a beautiful sunset in the background, it'll generate and create a brand new image based on the prompts that you put together, and all of its learning and training and everything that it's done. And you can get images very specific. That's how some of the images in here, you'll see, like when we get to the one of the case studies, you'll see that there's a baseball flying through space, and there's real specific reasons for some of the things that are in that picture, that I was able to generate with words in order to fit the particular slide I was looking for. It is fairly easy sometimes to tell what was generated by AI versus not, but part of that is based on free tools versus how advanced the tools are that are sitting on top of it. So, but anyway, I thought it was really interesting that the power growth is going to be there, and really there's a strong push for renewable energy options. They're looking into micronuclear options where you can have, like a mini nuclear plant at a facility level that's a safe environment that can power, a facility. They're looking at solar is really becoming a big option, especially north of the Arctic Circle. They're finding the temperature doesn't stop getting your power, and there's lots of wide open spaces where they can put the panels. So you do need, thousands of acres of panels in order to power big data centers, but it is coming along, and that technology is really growing. So there's a lot of supportive industries around AI that are growing exponentially now as well to support it.
And the infrastructure is really going to have to change too. Matt, would you give your stat about the electricity needs of ChatGPT?
Yeah, last year, ChatGPT used about the same amount of energy as every residence in the state of Illinois. So it just takes a tremendous amount of energy to power these big AI tools.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about.
It really is. Well, let's pause for a minute and see if there are any questions. And again, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen where you can type in a question or a comment if you have one. So let me pause there for a second and see if anyone has any questions or comments they wanted to share at this stage of the game. And we're kind of in the period of some of the foundations of AI. And on basically every one of these slides, I think we could have gone a lot deeper in a lot of different directions, but we're trying to cover a lot in a short amount of time.
Yes. All right, I don't see any questions right now. Okay,
Yeah.
so we can
Okay.
space on it later if we see some questions pop up.
That sounds good.
That's
Actually, we have
that.
one
We got a
question.
first question. What is it generally that makes GPUs better in AI processing than CPUs?
And first, let's define GPU and CPU.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so a CPU just stands for central processing unit, and the CPU on your computer has to do like a whole bunch of different things.
Right.
GPUs have a lot of say smaller powered processors, but a lot of them on the same card. And so when you're training an AI model, when you're teaching or letting the model learn the relationships between pixels in an image, or between words and text, or between different pieces of tabular data, it can split those tasks up amongst all the different cores on that GPU. So GPUs are much better for doing tasks like this that require calculations in parallel.
Cool. Thank you, Matt. Any other questions? If not, let's jump into our first use case. And this is all about fantasy baseball. Matt's going to kick us off on that. So first, Matt, kind of tell us the story. How did this work for you?
So I've been playing fantasy baseball for, probably since the mid 2000s, and really enjoy it, but it can be a time sink. So I think I started around 2015, but I started writing a bot that would just automate my fantasy teams for me, starting with the draft. So when I'm drafting players for my team, it would make all of those decisions about who to draft, how much to spend on each player. And then during the season, I wanted my bot to make decisions about who to put in my lineup on any given day. Should I start a player? Should I bench a player? Should I drop a player from my team entirely and replace him? And I spent the time to build something that would do that. And in 2016, had these bots play in ESPN fantasy leagues, and I finished first and second in the world in ESPN's leaderboard, and then repeated that again in 2017. So bots not only won my leagues for me, but actually, finished at the top of the worldwide leaderboards without any human intervention. So from the time I wrote my bots and let them draft my teams, I never touched them. I never made any decisions myself. They made all the decisions, and apparently can do it better than I can.
And were you inspired by Moneyball?
Sure. I think a lot of us that are interested in big data and predictive modeling and AI, we were inspired by first the book and then the Brad Pitt starring movie. But we had a slide for Buzzwords earlier in the presentation, and Moneyball used to be the way that some of this analytics were referred to.
Mm-hmm. And one question I know people have asked before is, was it fun for you to do it this way? It kind of takes some of the all the guesswork out of it, really, if the bots are doing it.
So, yeah, I get asked that a lot. For some context, Atiba's here in Nashville, Tennessee. A lot of us play music. So a lot of Atiba's employees play music, record music, write music. And those of us that don't have other hobbies like woodworking, 3D printing. One of the guys I'm on a team with writes novels. So a lot of us that do development and that work in data science have this kind of need to express ourselves creatively. And for me, writing software, creating a bot that does this well, scratches that same itch as playing in front of people live. It's just a way of creative expression, and it's very gratifying to see it work.
Yeah, this is such a neat story. And you had also mentioned that this would be a lot harder to do with football. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and that just goes back to our point about big data. So there's 162 baseball games every year, but there's only 17 football games in any given season.
Mm-hmm.
Baseball's much more predictable anyway, but having a much larger data set means that these algorithms can work the way that they were designed to, and not have to deal with all the randomness that exists in a smaller sample size. So I do automate my fantasy football teams too, and I'm winning more than I'm losing, but
Times by half a point.
But if you want certainty, you want a sport that plays more games more often.
Yeah, makes sense. And you are currently, well, I guess we're not in baseball season right now, but you are currently still doing this with baseball, right?
I am currently, as we're doing this webinar, crunching numbers for the 2025 baseball season.
Gotcha. Very cool. Well, I'd love to stay on this topic, but let's move on to a couple of our other case studies just in the interest of time. And if anyone has any follow-up questions about that, feel free to drop them in the chat. I see these other couple that have been addressed, and we'll get to those at our next discussion point here in a few slides. So Jeff, why don't you start out telling us about the project quoting tool?
Yeah, so one of the things we're working on for a customer is building an AI tool that helps them on the front end. So right now they have what I would call semi-customizable, semi-configurable buildings. So you can come in, I need a shed, I need another, room for the mother-in-law, I need a whole barn, some sort of structure built, and they'll have certain components. You're not going to be able to get 11.5 foot. It's going to be a 12-foot board. So they have some guidelines, but it's mostly customizable, and there's a set list of options. There's a lot of add-ons you could do, different things like that. So just think of any time you're doing something that's custom with a quoting tool, it's based on a lot of information and putting different pieces together. And what this tool will do is it standardizes the data capture first. So that's part of the big thing with AI is a lot of AI projects are less about AI when you start and are more about cleanup of data and standardization of data. So the first step, get all that process electronically, get it off of paper in 30 different Excel formats, and then put that in there. And then we implement the AI tool, and the AI tool is going to be able to go through take the information from sales, all the things the customer says they want, put it in there, and it's going to be able to come out and spit an inventory list saying you need this many boards, you need this many screws, this many brackets, all the way down. Where today, the waste that they come out of a product, you can typically fit in your hand. Like there's very little waste at the end of this because of the way that they have processes, and it's very efficient. And AI, we think with our initial goal, our target is 80% accuracy. And part of that is because we don't have the data consistent today and it's learning. And that will quickly grow to where you could probably expect it to be closer to the 95% accuracy. But there's always, in this case anyway, going to be a component of a human review and some analysis that goes in to that. So it's just kind of an interesting case study, and their main goal is I think they can save almost 2,000 years, basically a full-time employee's worth of time manually doing all these calculations, feeding it into Excel, trying to figure out the answers, do all the calculations. And it needs somebody that has, and a lot of times, 20 years of experience in the industry to really understand that if you have this overhang, it means this extra product is going to be needed, and these products will work with this, and this product won't work with this product. And so getting all of that together, you could save a person and move that person to another area that adds more value to the organization. And so for them, it's not about getting rid of people, they're growing. It's more about how do we expand our operations and how do we take good people with knowledge and put them in more important spaces and let computers handle the things that computers can handle. So overall, it's a pretty neat tool, help them quote and go through that process. And then also it's about loading the history. So they do have history and, like I said, multiple years in different formats, and we can load that in. Right, so we still can load that in. It's still helpful. It still helps train it. It's not as good as if everything had been perfect for the last 20 years and done the same way. But that's rarely how businesses work, especially as they grow. So you can take a lot of disparate type of information and still load it in and be helpful.
And one thing I wanted to add to that, you've already said this, Jeff, but just to summarize that, is that this project that they wanted to embark on for a quoting tool, it also, it's not just going to doing the project will not just benefit the quoting tool. It also help them better develop their processes for collecting that data and then processing that data and then using it for this quoting tool, but it'll impact a lot of other things too. So usually there's downstream and upstream effects from a project like this, which is kind of neat.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to move on to the next slide just to keep us moving through here. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the healthcare use cases here?
Yeah, so a few years ago, I got to work on a project for a home healthcare company. And what this company does is they send technicians into people's homes, and the technicians take pictures of the patient's feet. Those pictures are transmitted back to a doctor, and that doctor looks at those images for signs that may indicate like gangrene or neuropathy, ulcers, poor circulation, all kinds of different health issues that they can diagnose or at least see evidence of in the pictures that are sent by the technicians. And one of their big success stories was there was a man who was just a few days away from having a foot amputated and didn't realize how severe his problem was. The technician transmitted the pictures to the doctor. The doctor saw the pictures. They were able to get him care in time to save his foot. So that saved the healthcare industry, 6 figures of cost. Of course, much more importantly, saved a man from having part of his leg amputated. But when that happened, the company asked themselves, how can we prioritize these images? If days or hours matter, how can we make sure that the ones that are most likely to indicate a problem, how can we make sure those images get in front of our physician more quickly? So in this case, unlike the case you were just talking about, Jeff, they already had a lot of data in a good format to start with, because for compliance reasons, they had kept all of these images from the years they've been operating. So they had all of these images that they could train a model on to look for healthy feet versus potentially unhealthy feet. The real challenge in that case was just it still took a human, and it took a human with a medical degree the time to go through and look at each one of those images and label it as either potentially healthy or potentially unhealthy. But when most clients come to us and they're interested in AI, usually, yeah, one of the first steps is getting their data in order.
Hey, Matt, just to clarify too, when you're talking about getting the information in there, how long did that take to get people to review all these documents, and what kind of biases did you run into?
I don't really have any stats on how long it was taking before. But as far as biases, one of the problems that we ran into was there was a disproportionate number of people with light colored skin as opposed to darker colored skin, which could potentially introduce bias into the model. You know, when you're building the model that's based on images, you want to make sure that you don't inadvertently discriminate against a protected class. And in this case, there was a risk of discriminating against people of color. And the way that we solved that problem was we used something called image augmentation, but we basically took the existing photos we had and we generated new images
Yeah,
so that we had a more balanced set to train the model with. That's a good question.
yeah, that's pretty cool. Pretty cool solution.
Mm-hmm. I also like that the one of the illustrative points of this slide too is that, you know, using this tool, it's AI isn't prioritizing the doctor's time. It's not replacing the doctor. It's just kind of augmenting the care that can be given by a healthcare professional. It's another example of using AI as a thought partner as opposed to, you know, replacing something. Okay, I'm going to move on to a couple of use cases with Copilot, and then we'll address a couple of the questions in the chat here. So Jeff, why don't you kick us off with a little overview of what Copilot is?
Sure. And I was just going to say, while doing that, Matt, if you want to check the Q&A, I think there's some good technical ones that you might be able to respond in writing. Save us some time when we get to the answers or to the question section. So use case, Copilot. What is Copilot? So I'm sure everyone has heard of Copilot at some level if you've watched TV, even with all the news and the ads that they have. It's now even rolled out on your Windows computer if you have Windows 11. Copilot is basically a big umbrella branding exploit by Microsoft. So if you just say Copilot, you might mean one thing, but it could mean something completely different for somebody else, depending on what version and what type of product they're using. So as an example, these are all Microsoft flavored. So Copilot is the Microsoft flavor of AI. But you have Bing Chat. So if you've ever been to google.com, they use Gemini when it shows you the little AI summary at the top. If you go to Bing, they give you an AI summary trying to answer your question right there versus you having to go to multiple links to answer your question. That's more the Bing Chat. That's the Copilot within a browser and a search engine, and that's usually free. Then there's the Copilot for Office 365, which includes work, and there's different levels you can purchase on that. But basically, that helps really secure AI to your domain, gives you a private area that you're working in. So for example, if you have data on SharePoint or OneDrive today, you already have data in a private cloud with Microsoft, right? Nobody else is getting to your SharePoint site without going through all the security protocols. Well, in this case, with the Office and the Copilot for Office 365, if you get the enterprise level, it's capturing all that information there in that space and protecting your data as well. At least as good as the terms of service and privacy terms are that Microsoft honors for, again, just like you're using it for OneDrive or SharePoint or even your Microsoft email, right? You're trusting Microsoft and their privacy protections there. So it's the same type of function for that. And we'll get a little bit more into some of those examples. Right now, what I've found through experience is it's really good in Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Outlook. Those features are pretty well built out. They still have a way to go and some other features that could be pretty cool that they could integrate in. But some of the other ones are not as developed. So your Word has features. It has some generative features like ChatGPT. If you want to write something, it helps you. It coaches. But there's a lot of things that it could do in Word that it doesn't. It gives you good instructions. You know, Excel, similarly, there's some really cool stuff you can do with formulas and showing you things. In OneNote, it helps again with writing and helping you to organize some of your data. So in PowerPoint, it can actually generate some slide decks, but there's challenges with that. Sometimes prompts work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the exact same prompt works on Monday and it doesn't work on Thursday. So there's some of those things you have to kind of learn. It is a developing product. I would definitely not say that it's final. It feels more of a beta product right now that's out there for some of the features, but it is really cool, especially with a couple of the teams and Outlook. So a couple of things that I have here is, for teams during the meetings, you can put a prompt in there that says, catch me up, or what agenda items are remaining. So if you had an agenda for your meeting, there's 5 points, it'll tell you that the first 3 points have been covered through discussion. These 2 points are left. You could ask it mid-meeting, what action items have been identified so far. You can ask who has action items. You can ask it, what questions should I ask about the topic? So right now you could, if you had AI turned on and we're having this conversation, you could say, what would be a good question for me to ask? And it would actually generate some potential questions that you could ask to deepen your knowledge of AI or Copilot or any of the topics that we're talking about. So it has a pretty cool feature during the meeting. After the meeting, you get really nice meeting summaries that give you key points, and you can actually get into details as well. It'll give you a meeting summary, which gives a much more deeper level of information. You can obviously see the transcript. You can actually see exactly what Matt said at 12:02, what Jeff said at 1:16. You can find that information out. Action items, you can do all of those, and you can search after the meeting is over. You can do that. As part of the overall Copilot, when you have that installed at your enterprise, you can also search for something like, I know Matt told me something that was really cool about this topic, and I can't remember, was it an email? Was it in Teams? Did he send me an attachment? And that information was in the attachment. Well, one of the cool things with the Copilot search is it'll actually look through your domain and it will find things inside documents, inside email, inside Teams, and put it all in one place. So you don't have to search through 12 different applications trying to find something. So there's some pretty cool features, and that's just scratching the surface, but it's something we could talk about more later if anyone wants to hit me up after the meeting to talk about Teams.
There's actually a question in the chat right now about Copilot integrating it into Excel and Word. Are there features you found you wish that it had that it doesn't yet have?
Lots of features, yes. It doesn't do as much as I would want it to do. So for example, in Word, I might ask it to, create headings or even just create a table of contents. And instead of actually creating a table of contents, which should be pretty easy, you would think, for the AI, it's not built for that yet. It goes into the help and it gives you all the really specific instructions on how to do it. So it's still helpful. It's better than going to the help link and search and trying to find it. It'll give you the help, but it doesn't actually execute things. It doesn't change your data. In Excel, it seems to be hit and miss. I asked it one time in an empty sheet just to create a mortgage calculator with simulation where I can do a what if based on interest rates. And it generated the whole spreadsheet. It put the questions in there, it named the fields and the ranges, and it put them out there side by side. And I could look at different interest rates and I could see that. And then I said, well, what would be based on 25% payoff, when would the date be based on this start date? And it wasn't able to do that, but it gave me the formulas of how to figure it out. So it said, well, here's how you can calculate these things, but it didn't actually put the calculation in there. So there's some things that it can do that are pretty good, some things not so much. And that's actually, Excel is one of those cases where I found it works one day and the exact same prompt doesn't always necessarily work a few days later. So there's just a lot of things going on within Excel. The other thing that's just a quick tip for everybody is the Copilot only works in your Office 365 online suite. So if you have a document that's stored locally on your hard drive, the Copilot features won't work. So that's another thing that people don't realize. Like, Excel is not working, Copilot's not working. Well, if you don't have it stored in OneDrive or on SharePoint, it's not going to work. So, but it does have a lot of good features and power.
I'm going to switch through to the next slide just to show it in action. I'm a visual person, so this was a neat slide to see too. But this is an example in Outlook of how Copilot's kind of overlaying on top and doing some of the examples that Jeff talked through.
Yeah, so in email, you can have an email thread where someone goes back and forth and you have a whole set of topics, right? And you can ask it to quickly summarize that email, and it'll go through and it'll say, Anna Kate said this, Jeff said this, Matt said this, Les said this. It'll go through and give you a quick summary of what was said. There's a Copilot sidecar, they call it, which is what this little vertical box is on the right. And so you get the sidecar, and then down at the bottom is where you can actually type in your prompt. And so this is the one that's integrated into Outlook. There's also an overall sidecar for Copilot you can get with your browser, but this specific one is built into Outlook. So anything you ask it here, it's going to do within Outlook. But it'll do things like, let me summarize the last week of emails, and it'll come back and say, from the last week, these are the important emails. These are the important topics that were covered, and it gives you links right to specific emails that you can jump to. If you take a week vacation, you can ask it, what did I miss over the last week? And it'll come back and give you quick summaries of things. It's a great way, especially if people get tons of emails, not a lot, or you travel a lot, and you just need to quickly get an idea of what's going on. We had one of our clients that actually gets a bunch of newsletters that some of us think are junk. In this case, it was something he really wanted to read, just never had time to read. And so he was able to put in and say, summarize the last 7, newsletters on topic X. And it went through and found all those newsletters in email, put it together in a nice little written summary to say, here's the key points. And these are emails that you scroll and scroll and scroll through the newsletter. So each newsletter has a ton of topics. So it did some really quick things.
Let's answer a couple questions, and then we've got a few slides we can run through quickly, but we are running a little bit short on time here. But there was a question, I'll kind of work from the bottom up here. We won't have time to cover all of them, and we'll try to get some answers to these to send as a follow-up. But just in terms of using some of the files that you have, Blake had asked a question just recently. One of our systems is made up of about 10,000 files, and we'd like to use AI to help us make additions to the software and find bugs. Can this be done, and what would be the best way to do this? And this looks like a software development company. Matt, do you have any quick thoughts about that would be easy to share right now?
Yeah, just real quickly, the Copilot actually started out as a tool to help developers write code. It's really good at doing things like taking code that's written in one language and basically translating it into another language. We've had really good success with that. It's really good at writing tests. As far as finding bugs, I'm not sure. Like one of the things that we haven't discussed with AI is that it always sounds confident, even when it's wrong. So sometimes if you give it a piece of code and tell me ask it to tell you what's wrong with that code, it will give you some convincing sounding arguments for why you should refactor that may or may not be true. Our general impression so far of AI as a tool for development is it does about as good a job as a junior developer straight out of boot camp or college. And that's valuable, but it doesn't replace a senior developer with a lot of experience.
Okay, that's great. So perhaps there might be some low-hanging fruit you could use AI for Blake's question, but it's probably not going to write the whole system for you.
No, that's good. One real quick thing too is AI is really good at translating languages. So if you're trying to convert from C# to PHP kind of a thing, that's a big strength that it has. So if you're trying to go one way or the other, or just upgrade to a new version of software, we found that that's a strong piece. And then also QA testing, just as a high level, we don't have to get into the detail, but QA testing is an area where it can add a lot of value as well.
Yeah, and Blake, I know your question was about finding bugs. I'm not sure if it's great at that yet, but it is good if you do get error messages. It's usually quicker to diagnose that error message via AI than it is to search through something like Stack Overflow.
Let's go up to Paul Bilal's question. If creating a model for a specific task, this is in reference to the feet picture examples in the healthcare slide, do doctors have to work with programmers to identify the images that are more critical? And is this entered into the model manually? And I presume he means, and is that how it learns, or how do you teach it?
Yeah, so way back on one of those initial slides when we pointed out how generative AI often misspells words, uh, that's part of the problem is that the preparation work to build an image recognition AI model takes a lot more manual labor than to build one to do an LLM. So, and part of that process is, yes, you actually do have to have human beings that take, each one of those images and, labels it. So I talked about a Stanford professor uh, that generated this huge data set of images. Like it really did take her whole budget for several years. She had to use Amazon's Mechanical Turk to get some of that work done. It just takes a long time to prep image recognition models, compared to, say, working with tabular data or working with language. That's a really good question, and that's one of the barriers to getting one of those models up and running.
And once it is up and running, you don't necessarily need intervention on every level. You set thresholds, right? And you say, okay, if it's this confidence level, then it's here. If we think it's critical, then let's forward this over to a human to go ahead and look at. These are pretty confident, so they might still get looked at, but they might be at the back of the list.
Yeah, in the healthcare industry, every single case gets looked at. We're just talking about changing the order in which they get looked at instead of doing it in a random basis.
And real quick, there's a question about data formats and structure. The only thing I would say there is I think there's really not a favorite model of whether or not you give it data, JSON, CSV, Excel, file, data queries. Getting the data in is pretty flexible and it works a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I would say that it's great if I can get a CSV, but most of the time I'm actually getting JSON, and it doesn't matter that much. JSON just usually means there's just a few extra steps we have to take in order to flatten it out and to feed it to the model.
Yep.
I'm going to jump down to the risk slide and let's cover some high-level thoughts on that quickly, and then we can wrap up here.
Well, not to be glib, but I think probably the biggest risk involved in AI right now is just not participating. But there are some very real concerns with data privacy. That's something that comes up both with our clients and just with individuals that I talk to. And the bottom line on that is you probably want to consult your general counsel, but like on a practical level, check your settings. If you're using a browser-based prompt, check your settings to make sure that the model isn't being trained with your responses. In some cases, that might be perfectly fine, but if you're sharing something personal, something confidential, you don't want that being fed into a model to train in the future. At a corporate level, I think a lot of corporations should consider blocking access to general purpose LLMs. We've already seen examples of database connection strings and API keys making their ways into models in the very recent past. But again, we're IT and tech professionals. We aren't your general counsel. We don't want to give you legal advice on that. One thing near the bottom of the list there is just there is a risk with automated decision making. Like I'm perfectly capable of taking on that risk and happy to do it, to make my fantasy baseball lineup decisions. I think we talked about this a little bit, but if you're dealing with like a medical decision, if you're dealing with like say high stakes finances, you don't necessarily want to let the machine make all of those decisions until you're confident it's going to produce results that are as good or better as a human. And then it takes some of these models a long time to learn. So we hear about AI models that can beat chess grandmasters, and that's absolutely true. What you don't hear about is how long it took the model to get to that point. And these reinforcement learning models are terrible when they first start. So knowing when to turn those on and flip the switch is important.
Yeah, with the time I know that we have, we could probably talk for hours on this. And that gets to the point with Les, if you want to wrap us up, but we have these readiness assessments, we have tools that we can help you guys. We'd love to consult with you on some of this. But Les, you want to wrap up what we have here?
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeff. Guys, that was an incredible webinar. I appreciate it. I hope everyone enjoyed it out there as much as I did. We will be following up with you. You'll receive an email from us with a link to the webinar recording, a link to the AI guide download, and to your free AI pre-assessment that you qualify for registering for the webinar. It's been great today. I hope everyone enjoyed it. There is a post-webinar survey. One of the questions we're asking there is, let us know what other topics you'd like to see in the future. We do plan on having more webinars in 2025, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks for everyone attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.